You keep talking about an international system. We also heard you talk about the parallel interests of India and the United States. Of course, one thing about parallel lines is they never meet, but they do lead you in the same direction. And one of the directions in which India and America were going after World War II was the construction of an international system based on multilateral cooperation, the rule of international law. That system, with all the international organizations that grew up, no longer functions. We seem to be in a situation of purely bilateral bargaining, and you know where that can lead. So if we are to construct a new international system, it seems to me impossible to do so without China. And I'm afraid the one thing, in spite of everything you say, that we in India, like the United States, are seeking constructive engagement with China. But I don't, for one, see any evidence of China being interested in the construction of an international system. We in India didn't like the one you constructed because you were using it for your own purposes. We wanted a greater voice for India and Asia generally. If China wants it, we'd probably be on its side. But the point I'd like to ask you is, do you see any sign of China showing any interest in the construction of a new international system?
I didn't quite get the book.
Do you see any sign of China helping to create an international constructive system through a multilateral basis?
One has to understand that China has never in its history thought of an international system. They thought of themselves as the Middle Kingdom, and they were the international system until the 19th century. So when we asked them to be members of the international system, it is a system they believe they didn't create. But they don't, I believe it is possible to negotiate with China a set of arrangements which will amount to an international system. I think it is not a way they think to talk about the system in the abstract. It would have to be done as a series of specific arrangements which then merge into a system. That, I believe, is possible. But the notion of an existing system for which they have to pay an admissions price as if it were a club that they had not themselves created, that I think is harder to do. But as I pointed out, China faces a series of domestic challenges which they frequently proclaim. So we should, in that period when China is preoccupied, see whether we can create a set of arrangements that will become habit-forming as the period develops. That is my basic point.
Yes, just on an aside, the Chinese leadership has just announced that if they don't watch out, they'll have a cultural revolution.
The what?
They'll have a cultural revolution. That if they do not create sufficient economic reform and do get their economic wealth down to the ground, the leadership has just said that there'll be another cultural revolution of total turmoil. Do you see turmoil happening in China in the next 5, 7, 10 years?
No, I know what you know, that the Prime Minister has said what you have just quoted, that there is an urgency to reform. And I also know the facts that the demographic facts, the movement of population, the need for social harmony, as Hu Jintao proclaimed it. So all of this will be big tasks for China. Not because I say so, but because they themselves have described it that way. And within that context, I do not believe this is a time that will be characterized by international adventures. But I tell critics in the United States, this is not an academic debate. Let's do it and see what happens. And then we can answer the question.
Dr. Kissinger, recalling our brief discussion on Afghanistan about 2 years ago, in response to your question, I had said, now that you are in the thick of it in Afghanistan, it should end with mission accomplished. Please don't quit in a hurry, otherwise the Al-Qaeda and Taliban would have their tails up and claim to have the world on its knees. Dr. Kissinger, could we have your views on whether the US and its allies would have achieved their aim in Afghanistan and your prognosis of the situation post-2014? Thank you.
Our ambassador here is having progressively acute heart attacks. It's in the abstract, I would have preferred a slower withdrawal. And I would have preferred that the augmentation forces be reduced in a different way. But the way the situation has evolved and the various disagreements between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the United States makes it really very hard to explain to the American public why a more extended deadline would serve a purpose. So if you ask me as a professor of strategy, I don't think it is ideal strategy to give the other side one of its objectives as an entrance prize into the negotiation. But given the situation in which we found ourselves, I have sympathy for the administration. Now, what will happen when the Americans leave? My personal view is that the countries of the region should deal with this question and begin dealing with it now, because they will have to take the responsibility. If the country is left without any support system, the danger exists that various outside forces will enter it on a national basis, and that then a conflict, a proxy conflict, will develop inside the country, maybe even between neighboring countries in that country. And I believe that the neighboring countries and the international community should not sit passively until that moment arises.
Well, the neighboring countries first have to start talking to each other, which they barely do. Question from the back, please.
Dr. Kissinger, I just want to ask you a hypothetical question. When America went into Afghanistan because they were attacked by a non-state organization which they thought was actually in control of Afghanistan and occupied it with ground troops, we had a similar situation when we were attacked from across the body by what they claim to be non-state participants. Had we gone in hot pursuit of those people across the border to destroy the facilities that are constantly in a state of war, which is not declared, what would America's stance have been? Two, Chinese...
Just one question,
Yes.
please.
No, I just want to add both of these, which is a Chinese general once said that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That leaves America completely out of being friends of India. What do you have to say to that?
I don't speak for the United States to begin with. And the issue of what you do when military or non-military units from a neighboring country attack you has bedeviled American and everybody else's policy for 30 years. This is certainly the issue you described, is certainly one of the issues that will arise if matters are left without any international agreement. Considering what we have done, I mean, we would certainly have experience with the problem. How the president of that period would react, I couldn't predict. And the way you ask all of your acute questions, I'm in the position of somebody who's asked to commit suicide after he's already been murdered.
Would you ask? Yes.
Dr. Kissinger, if we
Perhaps
were...
it would help if you identified yourself.
I'm the ambassador of Turkey, but
Yes.
here I'm asking as a... Dr. Kissinger, I'm not asking as an ambassador, I'm asking as a student, if I may, in your presence. I would rather be a student. If we work on a model of Asia, and we assume the best case, that we reach a certain concert, and that the relations between the states are managed in the best possible scenario, and there's a more or less a stable order in the future. What would you think be the main centrifugal element of this balance? Would it be like, if you take the Concert of Europe analogy, nationalism, or would it be the rise of middle class, some Asian bourgeoisie coming with new demands? What is the basic centrifugal element to a stable order? Thank you.
What is the basic element that will ensure stability?
That would corrode the system, the balance that would be.
Which element would threaten any system that is seeking to create international order?
Well, first of all, let me take this occasion to say that I'm very grateful for the friendship and support that Turkey has shown to in its collaboration with the United States and its allies. It's a difficult question to say which element at this moment, an element, the radical Islamic element that claims that it has a right to assault any institution that conflicts with its teaching by extraterritorial attacks is certainly an extremely disturbing element. Or and one of the problems of the contemporary period is, as states get weaker and non-state organizations grow stronger, whether they are of religious or even criminal nature, that will become an increasingly disturbing element if ways are not found to deal with it.
So radical Islam, you think, is the one element that could destabilize. What about radical Israeli elements?
I think radical Israel doesn't disturb the whole equilibrium. It may disturb, in some situations, regional problems, more frequently local problems.
So do you see Israel, latest economist, or recent issue of Economist says 40% of the Israel army is now radical, Orthodox Jewish. Is that a problem within the region, destabilizing it?
Not unless they express it in international policies. Whether I personally like this or not is not the point.
Next question. I think there was a hand raised from this side. Yes, please.
Dr. Kissinger, my name is Bobby Seigel. I'm not sure about the lady who you met in Washington, whether you fascinated her or not, but you certainly fascinated me as a student of history. But on a more serious note, my question is to do with Iran. You said a while ago in your talk that the world cannot sit back and wait, talk about not having, the world cannot just talk about Iran not having a nuclear weapon and then allow it to have one. What do you think would be your advice to the United Nations or to the US on how they would engage in stopping Iran from becoming a nuclear state?
What would be your advice to UN or United States on how to sort out the problem of Iran without war?
There are a number of serious people who have tried to come up with thoughtful ideas. The general approach would be that if Iran accepts some irreversible restrictions on the level of its nuclear evolution, we should give meaningful guarantees for the security of Iran. And those guarantees could be formal, but what would be more likely is that if Iran really forms itself into an important national state, that cooperation between it and America would be natural. There is no organic reason for the United States to be in conflict with Iran.
Sir, just to follow up, why does the United States think that Israel's nuclear weapons are a factor or a contributing to peace, but Iran's potential nuclear factor is some great destabilizing factor for war?
I don't think the United States has expressed an opinion, as you have just said. I think there is the question of history, that the nuclear weapons in Israel were established before this issue arose. But there's also the fact that however powerful Israel looks, its existence is of a unique precariousness. If you look at a country that has a very narrow area, there are special security concerns, but America has not been a collaborator in the Israeli nuclear program.
Europe has been.
Well, I'm flattered by the idea that I can solve every problem before mankind. On behalf of your magazine, I'm happy to help you with it.
We are here in India, sir, and I think the question that was raised earlier, you gave a very diplomatic answer. And I think that I have to re-raise the question, why should America be allowed to go after terrorism in hot pursuit with war, but when a country like India, or even Israel is allowed to do that, but when a country like India asks for similar facilities or similar rights to go against terrorism from any neighboring country, the world advises patience. Is an Indian life less precious than an American life?
I don't know, what incident are you talking about?
I'm talking about terrorist attacks on India and India's response to it.
Well, it's very difficult for me to express to comment on a hypothetical point. I have said that the use of bases on foreign territory to attack into neighboring countries is a matter that has has almost always evoked a reaction. We've done it, others have done it, but one cannot give a blank check ahead of time when one doesn't know what the circumstances are. And
Circumstances would be Bombay.
What if the attack?
Yeah, we had an attack on Bombay.
Look, you know enough about international politics to know that I cannot give an answer that says India has an unrestricted right to do this. But you also know that very few people have had as much experience with sanctuaries and have shown understanding or practice in how to deal with it.
In America's war against terrorism, is Pakistan a problem or a solution?
It is both, and that's the dilemma.
It's both. Perhaps you could define how it's a problem and how it's a solution.
Now, when I agreed to come here, I was told to give a 35-minute speech and a 10-minute answer question. So I think we should
Well,
if I know you can keep it going till breakfast.
So you've lost none of your negotiating skills, have you? Should Israel attack Iran with or without America's permission before October?
I would certainly not give any advice of what Israel should do. I am concerned with American foreign policy. I support what the president has said on this issue. And if this were to occur against the opposition, the stated opposition of the president, all of us would need to consult how to to turn this into the most constructive outcome.